All right, we're a couple minutes after the hour, so why don't we kick it off? So thank you, Merck, Adrian, for joining. I'm super excited to host both of you. Maybe just to share a few words. Adrian, you're I think, one of the many folks that I got to know from the At Stake diaspora. Joel Wallmstrom actually initially connected us in hopes of getting you and Alex Stamos on a panel to see some fireworks. But some of your peers have gone on to start companies like Zane Lackey, to join businesses at running security at Datadog or Iterable. I'm thinking of Andrew Becker. And of course, you've had an incredible wealth of experience. When I first got to know you, you were running security for Android, which is, the most popular open source, operating system, and I appreciate it still to this day. And then you hopped over to Nest, and now are running security at Atlassian. So really excited to have someone who's been involved in some of the most intimate products that people use, and certainly products that are in continuous use by individuals, teams, and organizations. So thanks a lot for joining. Merck, I think I got to know you the same year that I got introduced to Adrian. Our friends at Paladin introduced us. And I'll never forget that I was lucky enough to hear yes after offering you money 20 minutes into the conversation, probably before I knew what you were actually doing as CEO of Expel. Which is to provide kind of 24/7 transparent managed security, which is an incredible service. Beyond kind of having the fortune to serve on your board, I've learned so much, not only about your rich history and investigations and forensics from your time at FireEye and Mandiant, and of course in the field before that. But I've also learned a lot about being human. So I'm really excited to talk to both of you in the context of security, particularly in this moment, where I think the world is going to change and adapt based on what we've experienced. So let's jump in. Since both of you are super pragmatic, I thought we could just start with a couple of pragmatic tips. And in honor of my wife, Poonam, who's a pediatric dentist, I thought we could start with some basic hygiene. So maybe, Merck, starting with you, can you share kind of 2 or 3 basics of security hygiene that Expel uses to keep its customers safe?
Yeah, I thought a spin I would put on this would be something that's broadly applicable, but also will not be terribly surprising. The kinds of things we end up recommending as we're protecting our customers that they do that they may not be doing. Sing along if you've heard this before, and Adrian will probably facepalm. Multi-factor authentication. Yeah, we still have to tell people that in 2020. And along with that, single sign-on wherever you can. Tie everything together, single identity and multi-factor as much as you can. Backups, yeah. Still telling people that in 2020, particularly in an era of ransomware being a crime of convenience and a great way to profit if you are a casual bad guy. And then this one's also not going to sound super great or exciting. Patching. So the same 3 things that I was telling people back when I was on the practitioner side of things pre-2006 are some of the same things that we end up needing to guide organizations towards for a variety of different reasons. Obviously, at Expel, when we started the company, we wanted to actually be a security company and more than just names. So we try to make sure we do all the things we told people that you should do, so that we're not approaching that from a hypocritical point of view, like have a CISO, they should report to the CEO, they should go to the board meetings, you should do all the things I just talked about. But even today, we do find ourselves having to provide companies this kind of feedback where, in my own personal opinion, we should probably be a bit past that, and those should be table stakes to even open the doors of your business.
Adrian, any hygiene tips from you?
I got nothing. David took all the things. So no, I would add two things actually to that list. The first is what I think of as just keep it simple. so many enterprises, especially, but also consumers, are worried about security. And so they buy something with the expectation that they then have to do a lot in order to make it more secure, right? You buy a laptop and then you add antivirus and you add anti-malware, et cetera, et cetera. But the simple approach is go get a Chromebook, where you have to do basically nothing and it's secure. Go get an iPhone where you have to do nothing and it's secure. Go get an Android device and do nothing and it's secure. And the modernity of those operating systems fundamentally changes the security profile. And I think the biggest thing that's holding back enterprises, but also consumers from getting to a point where they're secure, is the rate at which they avoid making that switch. So that's the first thing that I would say. And the second thing that I would flag beyond multi-factor is don't ever choose your own password. If you're using Chrome or any of the other popular browsers at this point, they basically have a password manager built in. It's going to recommend a password for you. You're going to say yes to whatever it is that it recommends, and you're going to move on. And the reasoning is twofold. One, the biggest type of compromise that we still see in the world is duplication of passwords and reuse of passwords. And two, those passwords are now going to be protected by, well, probably Google, who's got the best security team in the world, monitoring that on a regular basis. They've got a risk engine. And so they're going to be able to help you out if they start to see any kind of issues. So, those are the two things that I would say is make sure you're using a reasonable operating system. Don't try to secure it yourself. Rely on the people who've done it that are professionals, and do the same with your passwords.
And Adrian, do you have just as a follow-up on that, do you have a point of view on other password managers like Bitwarden or OnePass or LastPass?
I mean, as a corporation, we provide one that's not, but as a human, I figure putting all my eggs in one basket and having that be the most secure basket I can possibly do is the way to go. So I rely personally exclusively on Chrome.
Got it. Cool. So thanks for the quick tips. Let's dive a little deeper onto one segment of the customer universe that you guys focus on B2B companies. So dental clinics are shut down, but many B2B businesses, software companies are still live. And my view is the laws of work physics are going to change. Like literally how people spend their time and their space will change going forward. Turns out like adversaries are pretty good at adapting to new opportunities, whether they're using automated, broad, blunt instruments to find targets, or if they're surgical and precise. What I'd love to learn what you guys are seeing in the context of endpoint security, network security, general corporate security in light of adversary behavior. So maybe Merk, starting with you, since you're at the front lines, what are B2B customers seeing today that's different in the behavior of adversaries?
Yeah, so we have seen like since March, so recently, something that isn't terribly surprising in that bad people use bad things or bad times to do bad things to people, right? So the number one incident that our customers run afoul of tends to be business email compromise. That was true pre-COVID. That's even more true now. I think March we saw like a 12% uptick across our customer base in the volume of those kinds of attacks. And I would expect April's probably going to increase yet again. And that's, I said it's not surprising. If we go back and I dig back in my history bag for old stories, anytime world events create some kind of opportunity for messaging, right? So you think about business email compromise, bad guys going after users, phishing credentials, trying to break into their email accounts, et cetera. Those bad guys are essentially conducting a marketing campaign, right? They're trying to influence you, the end user, with something to get you to click the link, download the thing, whatever it is. And so they're going to capitalize on anything that entices you to do something that otherwise maybe you wouldn't do. And things that are highly emotional, sensational, those kinds of things create a great screen and cover for that. And so that's probably the most prominent thing we've seen. We have seen a I'll now prognosticate just a little bit. which is always dangerous. We have seen a continued increase in attacks against customer cloud infrastructure, so things that are in AWS or GCP or what have you. That just makes sense, as you would expect. More and more customers are putting things in those environments, and so increasingly attackers will go that direction. The prognostication part of this is I feel that will continue to greatly accelerate, because I think adoption of those platforms will accelerate, particularly in a post-COVID world where concepts around resilience and business continuity and what have you just took on a whole new flavor. If you're a cloud native business recovering post-COVID, the switch over to dealing with you're at home and facilities are impacting whatever was way easier than if you're still managing data centers, on-site assets, what have you. So I expect the adoption of those technologies to accelerate. I expect focused attacks on those infrastructures to accelerate, and they will also probably accelerate the rate at which they mature, because they're still, defenders are in the early days of trying to figure out what's a good security strategy in most of those environments. Attackers, many of them, are in early days of figuring out what's most effective to go after them. So
I'm curious if I can jump in for a second, Dave. One of the things that we've been thinking about a lot, we haven't seen it yet, but we're not sure, is that now that we've got everybody working from home, the basic sort of topography of our attack surface from a user endpoint standpoint is changed. And in particular, just to get specific about it, we have split tunneling enabled for all of our developers. They're doing development. A lot of it is web development. So some of the development they're doing is actually producing web servers that spin up and spin down on their client workstations. Not to give too much away. And we're trying to figure out whether there's anybody who's probing that or thinking about that or going after that. We haven't seen anything yet. We've seen a strong uptick in bug bounty and like professional researchers having more time. But we haven't seen anything in terms of direct endpoint sort of manipulation of the fact that everybody is from home. Have you seen that? Do you have visibility into that, given the services that you provide?
Not anything that's different than the norm. Okay. And we have visibility if the customer has deployed things like EDR, like good point coverage, and provided that their work from home employees are actually working on a work asset where that EDR agent is present. And sometimes maybe that's not true. So I don't think we've seen anything significantly different there. That's an interesting point you raise about some of the development, for your specific example, development infrastructure now existing actually in that environment. Does that create a new opportunity? That's interesting. I don't think it
definitely does. So we're making some configuration changes to modify it. And it probably was always there, but it was 1%, 2%, 5% of our folks. Now it's 100. So
yeah.
Adrian, I'm not sure the answer, but does Atlassian run a bunch of infra on GCP or AWS or another CSP?
We're high 90 percentile AWS.
And so do you think consistent with the prior argument on kind of trusting Google, right, and its security team, do you think it's net positive or a net negative that there might be more kind of discovery and attacks on cloud infra?
Oh, I have no doubt that it's a positive. I think, I firmly believe that the reason security sucks as much as it does is because it's been highly fragmented and highly cost competitive, and that the consolidation of tech stacks basically pushes the incentive and makes economy of scale work inside of security. So I have no doubt that, Amazon, GCP as well, and the benefits of having your infrastructure running as much as possible on those platforms vastly exceeds the risk. Like you just have tons and tons of visibility, and you get immediate responses, right? Like one client gets compromised, AWS notices that, they will make changes inside of their tooling. So yeah, there's no question in my mind that it's better. And we're moving to get to be 100%. We're not quite there yet, but that's our plan.
Maybe switching to B2C companies, where there's probably there's something different going on, right? Where there are some companies that are absolutely exploding. One of our investments is in a gaming company where the founder recently described every day as Saturday, which is not the same kind of blur maybe that, Dave, you've been experiencing recently, but it's every day is a happy day since people want to be entertained. On the other hand, there are industries that are being rocked. Healthcare services, transportation as two examples. Adrian, what do you think? Like, what should B2C companies be worried about right now in the context of security and risk?
I mean, there's some things that are positives, so I'll flag those. You know, one of the big challenges that we used to have in the context of Google services was people moved around a lot. So building threat models and risk models that were based on proximity was difficult. But I'll tell you what, right now, if there's anybody connecting to any of my consumer accounts from anywhere other than this house, that's something that a risk model should be flagging. And it should be super, super simple to do that. So we ought to be right now catching a lot of indicators that previously would have been hidden in noise. I haven't had a conversation with anybody yet on any of the big B2C companies about whether they've taken this as an opportunity, but it seems like one that probably has fallen in their lap and they should be pretty excited about. Scaling is the biggest challenge, right? And it's either scale up or scale down. And then the complexity with supply chain are the things that people are running into right now. You know, we use Zoom. A lot of companies use Zoom. You know, there was scaling both in terms of their infrastructure. They've done an incredible job building that up. But there was also scaling in terms of all of a sudden they were in the spotlight and had to be literally the best in the world because any kind of weakness from a security standpoint was going to get a lot of criticism. And I think that pattern is going to play out in lots of different places. Within our own services, we're seeing a significant uptake in both usage and companies that are interested in transitioning from on-premise to cloud because they're realizing it's just way easier. And anything that they can do to simplify their lives right now simplifies their ability to scale up or scale down. Makes a lot of sense. It's Saturday for that gaming company, you know, today, but next week it's going to be like all Mondays. Or Tuesdays, so or you know, next month or sometime. So they're thinking about what that means for their business model and how they can weather that is going to be super interesting.
And just double clicking on Zoom. So two questions here. Zoom bombing is a real thing, and second, how are you thinking about kind of practical use of Zoom at Atlassian?
Yeah, I'm sure it's a real thing. Lots of things are real. I can't imagine that it is frequent or nearly as exciting as the headlines made it out to be. As far as I know, you know, we haven't had any real incidents of it, and we have all of our people in meetings all day long. We have made some configuration changes, so we've now enabled passwords or two-factor with SSO. One of those two things is going to be required on every meeting. You either need to be an authenticated user within our infrastructure, or you need to be a password on your meeting for external meetings. So we made a few small changes, but nothing big, and continue to march on forward.
And Mark, maybe riffing on Adrian's point on you've got to scale up or scale down. There are definitely companies whose revenue have dropped precipitously overnight. And so it feels like their only real choice is to scale down. Like practically, what can customers do, particularly when, you know, we see attacks on San Francisco Airport, right, or health services? Like, what can organizations actually do when they have to, when they're forced in some sense to scale down?
Yeah, I think the first thing you have to do is have some realistic expectations. So, depending on the kind of business you were, maybe you were thinking about, you know, more advanced threats and different kinds of nuanced risk. As you lose the ability through people or dollars to have a more sophisticated program, you know, probably one of the best things you could do is just retrench on those fundamentals and make sure that those don't slip. And those are things like we actually talked about at the beginning. Do you have good basics like multi-factor? Adrian raised some good ones with simplicity. Simplicity of OS, simplicity of approach, simplicity of processes. Like, you're not going to have the energy for anything elaborate or esoteric. Are you doing patching? Are you doing, you know, those essential basics? And are those essential basics, you know, 100%? backups, et cetera. Like if you don't have the energy to do something elaborate, like you've got to just retrench and have realistic expectations. Like if you're a hotel chain and 80% of revenue is gone overnight, like you're not going to have the luxury of sitting around worried about nation state threat actors. Like they're coming in if they want to. You will not be able to afford a program or the things necessary to be effective. You might be able to still be effective if some ransomware shows up on a Tuesday and wants to lock something down and destroy your continuity of business. So I think you've got to get into a different mindset on what are the absolute must-dos, and there's a bunch of stuff that's just got to fall to the wayside. The other thing that I would recommend, if you're a CISO in one of those organizations, hopefully you came into the organization and built business partnerships. You didn't come in as the CISO of no and make a bunch of enemies by being a disruptor to business. But if you had an enabler of business mindset, then you have the ability to lean on other organizations, to lean on partnerships with your CIO, CTO, so that you're not alone trying to fight those battles. If you didn't lay those foundations ahead of time, then it would be a pretty tough situation indeed, because you may in fact be kind of all alone in the night.
There's a related follow-up question here in the Q&A, and I'd encourage everyone who's dialed in to feel free to ask questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Just kind of double clicking, what's the best practice in identifying what's crucial and critical? Like, how do you actually get started on that journey of not trying to do everything, but prioritizing the most critical functions?
I think that really comes from your business relationships. Like, did you have those conversations when you came in with other owners of business lines to find out what are the things that are most critical to each piece of the business in different scenarios? In the high likelihood that global pandemic and market disappearing overnight was not on that list, and it probably wasn't to this extent, revisiting that is really step one. And because the thing that may have been most important to a given business line back in December may not matter at all right now. So I would go there first and not rely on your own perceptions. And also consider having conversations like they say, well, my number one risk is X, whatever it might be. And you look at that and you know, in the current reality, there's just no way. Like, have a dialogue. Hypothesize I can't help you with X and you're going to have to accept that risk. Now what would you do? Like, you really have to kind of game at that a little bit to try to crunch it down and have some really, frankly, probably not very upbeat talks about the current reality, but be brutally real and honest in those conversations to get that list down to to the bare minimum. Probably a tough exercise even now as people try to get their head around, kind of just how bad a particular situation might be, particularly in a heavily impacted industry.
And maybe, Adrian, for you, this takes me back to kind of literally the first conversation you and I ever had. For this audience, there's many folks who probably don't have a CISO, right? And the question may be, should we have a CISO? What does he or she look like? I know you've thought about kind of putting yourself out of a job in some sense, right? And have thought carefully about org design. But for folks who don't have the luxury of a clear kind of security leader who can find executive sponsorship, like how do they get started?
Wow, simple questions. I think Shardul and I did have a conversation. It was several years ago, and it is my belief that long-term the CISO role doesn't exist. That in the same way that chief electrician doesn't exist at any major corporation, and we rely on the power company and we rely on the sort of existing platforms to provide some of that capability. I think eventually most of the function that a CISO currently plays is going to end up becoming platform provided, right? Amazon is going to do your underlying infrastructure. Microsoft and Apple and Google are going to do your client side infrastructure. And frankly, we'll be better off for that. It also helps with the scaling, by the way, right? Amazon, in particular, but all the cloud platform providers at this point, yes, they're seeing some businesses going down and some going up, but in aggregate, they're just seeing growth. And that gives them the ability to weather almost any kind of disruption and still invest security at a very high level. So that's something I think about as well. But you're a small company, you're trying to think about what to do. I think beginning to incorporate security into the set of questions that you as a leader for that company would be asking is the right thing to do. There's a pretty good chance that your head of engineering and your head of product, if you ask them about security, can give an answer that is as good with a little bit of thought as most security leaders. So making it clear that even if there's not a security leader, each of the areas is going to be accountable for security, will sort of solve the problem itself. And I know that's a little bit of optimism, but my experience has been, even as a security leader, the most important thing that I can do is ask my VP of engineering, what are we not doing that you think we should be doing based on your experience other places from a security standpoint? And often the guidance we get from them is just as valuable as anything that I would be able to offer. So I think as a senior leader, that's the right thing to do, is to begin to set that level of accountability and make sure that it's throughout the organization, not sort of just in your security team.
Yeah, I think that often people think about risk management in the context of people, process, and technology. And sometimes they overweight kind of technology and picking up more tools to solve a problem. But there's so much value in process. And something we learned from, Doug Song, right, and Duo was if you can invite everyone in an organization to participate in a security model with just a little bit of friction, you can completely change the risk profile of the business. But both of you are also kind of in the business of fostering collaboration amongst your internal teams in order to construct a better experience for your customers. And so what are the other kind of processes, whether they're cultural or otherwise, that you think about? Maybe we'll start with you, Merk, on making your teams more collaborative and thereby amongst themselves more secure.
Yeah, so I'll pick a couple cultural ones. First, we put a lot of emphasis around the concept of transparency. When we started the company, I wanted to be in a position to really talk to everybody in the company about everything. And when there's not secrets, then there's fewer places for things you need to know to hide. So that was very important. A culture of appropriate, good judgment, but also risk-taking and mistakes being a thing that are going to happen, and that's okay. And the reason that's important is people need to be unafraid to say, hey, we have a problem here. Here's a problem, here's an issue. Like the way you're going to find out about the risk you didn't know anything about and may have passively accepted instead of actively accepted is somebody tells you there's something really wrong over here, and you turn it over and it's like, oh my God, we're doing this, and it's exposing ourselves, our customers, or whoever to some kind of security exposure. Like, you want to know about those things, which means you've got to have a culture that brings that to your door. And then lastly, I think I mentioned this earlier. My own personal experience working at other startups and knowing a bunch of other executives at security startups, sometimes security startups have really crappy security. And we didn't think that was the right thing. And so we put a heavy emphasis early on walking the walk. So we hired a security leader early on to hold us accountable. That security leader works for me. That security leader has educated the board, to include yourself, on how you should hold me and my team accountable around those same things. And we tried to stitch it in very early on. I think Adrian raised a great point. I care about, our risk modeling and the risks we're accepting and not accepting. I care about our security program. And so I ask a lot of questions, and it does have the impact of making it important to my team, so that it's not just the CISO or just me thinking about it, but it gets very, very ingrained. And then that shines through. Like for us, not only do I think it's the right thing to do, but the business we're in, it's a competitive advantage. When you talk to my people, like if you're a CISO looking to buy some Expel, you talk to my people, you will feel that texture of that culture from those people. And it's because they're living it. So we set that stage at a super early phase and have stuck to it and invested in it basically since day one.
Adrian, maybe from your perspective, and I know I didn't script this question for you, so I'll give you another live grenade. How do you, if you service it to the exec team, many CISOs have a real challenge in communicating with other business leaders in language, right, that can allow for appropriate resource allocation and consideration of the kind of ROI on the investment. How do you think about communicating with the exec team around prioritizing product security, as an example?
So I think fundamentally, some of this comes down to how you view yourself in the context of those discussions. David mentioned transparency. He mentioned how important it was to have everybody be aware of the information, and also making sure that communication is sort of crisp and clear. A key thing that I try to instill in the management team, and really within all the folks on my team as well, is a sense of what our role is. Our role is not to be your dad or mom, whichever of your two parents is the one that tells you what you need to do and you just are expected to do it. Our role is not to be your priest, where you come and tell me all the bad things that you've done and you expect me to say, it's okay, you know, you're absolved of those sins, you can continue doing them. Our role is to be a trusted advisor, where if someone doesn't know what the right thing to be doing is, they ask us, we help them figure it out, and then this is important, they do it. Not I do it, right? If bugs aren't getting fixed, that's not a failing of the security team. If bugs aren't getting fixed, that's a failing of the engineering team. If a company has not adopted the security practices that are being recommended by their CISO, either that means that CISO should be fired because they're just making crazy recommendations and they're not appropriate, or the CEO should be fired because they're not following the recommendations from somebody that they hired that's doing a good job and making good recommendations. Right? There's no clean case for a CISO who's frustrated, and yet that seems to be the most common model that we have in the industry, where the CISO makes recommendations and the board or the executive team doesn't follow them. So there's something like fundamentally broken in the understanding of what those roles are. And so, you know, I try to make sure that we set up an agreement in the executive team about what it is that we're going to do, right? We as a security team are going to make sure that you're getting the best recommendations, that they're ones that are appropriate, that they're ones that can be implemented, that they're ones that you really should implement, and we won't be crazy. And you need to do it, because otherwise we're just wasting our time. And so that's like a really really blunt way to do it, or way to describe it. But I think that's important. And I think that's overlooked a lot in establishing those relationships. And it's the source of a lot of the struggle.
Have you used tabletop simulations as a kind of tool or technique to drive better communication, response, business continuity?
I mean, yeah, we certainly use tabletops, especially around sort of low probability events. You know, frankly, the thing that we use the most is basic scorecards, right? Here are the set of things that we expect that are going to be happening. Here are the number of issues that have been flagged. Here are the types of issues that have been flagged. And here's the progress that you've been making over the last month. And so at least for my current environment, on a monthly basis, we do that. And then literally on a daily basis, we're checking in on the status of things, because there's lots of different SLAs and lots of different due dates, and then having sort of micro level conversations about whether the teams are there. But we have at least a monthly roll up with every part of the business to discuss how they've been progressing around those expectations.
Cool. Let's kind of go just in the last kind of phase before we get to questions that folks are asking. Let's get to this idea of kind of the rituals or habits you have. You touched on kind of monthly and weekly with what you're doing, Adrian, but maybe share kind of what you do daily, either individually to secure yourself, your family, your home, or your team. But talk to us about like habits you've built over many years that other folks might be able to take with them. That's for you, Adrian, first.
You go to me first. I'm not a very paranoid person. I'll be honest. I once did an interview where someone asked how I protect my home, and I acknowledged that I actually leave my front door unlocked most of the time. That's no longer true. Immediately after that article ran, because it did mention that the head of Nest Security doesn't lock his front door, I went and made a few changes to make sure that nobody dropped in on my kid and my wife that were at home that day. But I think fundamentally, what it comes down to is awareness of self and awareness of situation. And that more than anything drives whether you're sort of secure. So pay attention to the people that are around you. Pay attention to what it is that's going on, both in a professional context, but in a personal one as well. Listening is probably the best, both offense and defense, when it comes right down to it. Not a technical answer, but that's the core.
Let's see. The pay attention resonates with me a lot. And that's both pay attention in your immediate context, but also pay attention, well, in world events. The likelihood of desperation-based physical crime is significantly increased right now. So like Adrian, we have the great privilege of living in a great community where we haven't had to worry too much about locking our door. Is the door locked? Yeah. Are the blinds down at night? Yeah. On the more technical side of things, something we tell all our employees, because it's true for the kind of company we are, is not only will you be targeted as an employee of Expel, but you will be targeted as an individual, and your family will be targeted, and they will be targeted to get to you. And so things that we do there, in addition to preaching all the sorts of individual hygiene things that you should do, again, sing along if you know the words, multi-factor, Adrian and the password manager is exactly right. In fact, we happen to use 1Password at Expel just because we actually buy a family subscription for every employee so that they can take it home and they and their family can use it also. Separate, don't cross the streams. So please use your work resource for your work things, and don't do work things on your, like your gaming PC sitting on your desk at home, which would be my example. So try to, divide your domains a little bit. And, just remember that the habits that your own family has will impact what's going on in your environment, and people will go through them to get to you because of where you work. Again, but I think all of that rolls up to what Adrian said, just being aware of your surroundings and the context of the risk that you face based on who you are in the world around you.
Cool, because I have many other questions, but I do want to maybe go through the Q&A that was shared. So it won't be in a, I'll kind of direct it based on, I think, who brought up the question in the context. So there's a question on Google. So Adrian, I think at the beginning you said you trust Google, and when they recommend a password, you say yes. And I know my partner Mike is on this call, so he'll appreciate that my use of Chromebook is rubber stamped by you. But the question is, what if it gets compromised? All your passwords are stored in one place. So help folks understand kind of the risk reward of really trusting Google with passwords.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite aspects of the security community is no matter what you do, there's going to be a risk. And fundamentally, it comes down to acknowledging that there's going to be a trade-off, and then hopefully gathering enough data to be able to make a smart trade-off. So in this particular case, it is absolutely the case that there's a risk that Google gets compromised and all of the passwords in the world get exposed. But I'll tell you what, if that happens, Google's going to notice, and they're then going to do something about it, which is they're going to automatically, and literally it'll be automated, reset all those passwords everywhere in the world and sort of work through that process. And even at a micro level, having all of your eggs in one basket, as I mentioned earlier, it's a risk. I don't disagree with that. But the reality is the history has shown that that's just safer. We don't see it happening. Like, it hasn't happened in roughly 10 years that they've been providing that service. There's a continued incremental and increasing investment in protecting that. And there's a team there that's dedicated to doing it. Whereas all of the people that I see that try to manage it on their own end up eventually reusing or using some kind of predictable mechanism for generating those passwords. When I saw this question, though, I was thinking about it. I was like, well, what can I do to protect myself against it? How about this? Use the built-in password manager, which just fills it in, and then type a 3-digit number after that. And now you've got the best of both worlds, right? Where you've got a little bit of a secret on top of it, and you're going to have to compromise Google in order to be able to get to it. So there probably are some tips and tricks like that that would allow you to merge and not be 100% dependent on Google. I haven't bothered with that, but something that you might do if you're feeling especially paranoid.
Mark, there's a follow-up question on endpoints that I want to direct to you. So the question is, how do you secure users' physical machines when they're not behind the corporate firewall? What's your thinking on kind of endpoint?
Yeah, and actually that's it. Our security model at Expel was built that way from the ground up. So there's a concept which is not new, but is somewhat bandied about more often now, called zero trust, where basically you make the assumption for everything that you build in your business that your end users, the people that are going to interact with you, are not coming from a place of trust. So what does that mean? First, it means that you authenticate everything and you do it all multi-factor and you make it all single sign-on as much as you can. It means that for the endpoint that the user is utilizing, you're going to secure that pretty aggressively. So you're going to have AV, you're probably going to have a more advanced endpoint solution on there, some kind of endpoint detection and response solution, like, you know, a CrowdStrike or a Carbon Black. Microsoft ATP, their stuff's pretty good, actually. So you're going to have that investment. And you're going to hook all that stuff up to an effective detection and response operations capability where people care about the alerts and information that those products generate, and you prosecute it aggressively. And that works. And actually, you have the benefit if you build that correctly, which is, it's hard to bolt it on after. Like if you're a company that's got a network and a firewall and you trust things from inside your network and you've got VPNs and you've got a whole mishmash of stuff, like fixing that after the fact is not impossible, just takes a lot of time and energy. If you're a newer business and can build sort of a zero trust model from the ground up, then it actually makes you incredibly resilient when things happen. Like on a Monday, you walk in and tell everybody by Tuesday afternoon they're not coming back to the office again until who knows when. Because in essence, you already built your company to not trust your networks or anything else. Everything is available all the time if you have the right, authentication and if you have your work asset with you. So it's those kinds of things that you have to employ for that to be effective. And if you're not doing it and you haven't thought about that, I'd strongly recommend, especially now, it's probably something to take a look at, because for the next who knows how long, we're going to be going there and back again in terms of office facilities being open. I do think that lots of new incident response, tabletop exercises and disaster recovery exercises all of a sudden are going to have global pandemic on the list. Like, it's a technique that can make you more effective because it divorces you from your need to have physical infrastructure to do your job.
Cool. Well, I wouldn't want to end this on divorce as a note. So maybe I'll ask
you have security people that you're talking to. It's always going to be this, it's unicorns and rainbows all the time, right?
You mentioned global pandemic. Like, that was pretty optimistic, I thought.
No, I appreciate it when I tried to tee you up for fear, Adrian, how you responded with positivity, and I really take it to heart that I think in some sense, whether it's zero trust or even more simple models for security, risk engines have an easier time in detecting where people are and where they're logging in from, which I think is a real positive that comes out of the current situation. So maybe in the last 30 seconds, I'll ask each of you to give another kind of positive that you're experiencing that can reassure people that it's not all fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Let's see.
I have a specific one that's kind of funky. So we make Jira, we make Confluence, we make things for tracking a lot of micro tasks. And we're finding that our employees are actually more productive around those micro tasks. Because at the end of the day, you're like, oh, I wish I could just do something that sort of gives me the ability to separate myself from reality and everything around me. And so you go look at your list of bugs and you fix them. So we're actually seeing a lot of the hygiene types of things that often were not interesting. When people are isolated, they're happy to do them. It's sort of mindless, brainless stuff that you might have ignored before or been annoyed by before. And now it's just a sort of a form of escape. So our hygiene's going up, which is kind of cool. Except that everybody's in pajamas, which I guess is less hygienic. I don't know. But from a technical standpoint, hygiene's going up.
Okay, that was hilarious. I'll provide a couple, one kind of external, one internal. Externally, I actually think having meaningful conversations in businesses about risk on the far side of a global pandemic is going to be way easier. What's the likelihood of that happening? Well, were you here in 2020? I mean, we should at least think about this a little bit. There is a constructive aspect about that. And there's also, I think we're going to get through this. And so when you are talking about even potentially scary risk scenarios, having gone through something really scary and really different, but surviving it will give you a more level-headed way to talk about it and think about it, as an organization. So I think there's a resilience that comes from dealing with tough things. Internally, something that just I personally have really enjoyed is just watching how people lean on each other as a crew. And the amazing things that they will do for one another. We actually, Shardul, you and I were talking about this last week. Our crew were like, F this pandemic thing. We're doing take your kids to work day. And so they did. And so we had an all day take your kids to work day. Like we opened and talked to everybody's kids. And then there was we broke them up by age group and somebody did a reading hour with the little kids. And then our CISO, Bruce Potter, taught the older kids how to pick locks. So I don't know how popular that's going to be, but with the parents, but
Elmo costume.
No, that's right. Yeah, someone had an Elmo costume. Our
really
head of employee experience, Amy, led a dance class for something. It was just watching how everybody can lean on each other and bring this really amazing energy, even in a trying time. I find, frankly, just amazing and inspirational. So every time I see a story about that, whether it's in our company, in our organization or anywhere else, I think that speaks volumes to how resilient and positive humans can be when they need to.
I like the company sponsored Take Your Kid to Work Day. That's awesome.
I
think it reflects reality in a way that we keep having kids just pop in and out. We've never done it in an intentional way. So that's
happy to share our agenda, or if somebody there wanted to chat with Amy and our crew that put it together, we're more than happy to hook you up because
cool.
it was super cool. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for investing your time. I know it's precious, so thank you for sharing your time and your thoughts with our community. It's really appreciated. For folks that we didn't get to your questions, feel free to email them to me, and I'm sure Dave and Adrian would be open to helping kind of form a response, and we'll get back to you. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.